It's a great pleasure for me to welcome you to the first webinar of European Women Rectors Association today. During the last Board of Directors meeting and EWORA General Assembly, both were held on 4th of September 2020 as online sessions. It was decided to organize 3 webinars before we meet hopefully in Zurich on 9 to 11 June 2021. As we have already announced, ETH Zurich kindly going to host the 7th EWORA conference in its premises, and we do hope that this pandemic will be over by June 2021. We are working together with the rector of ETH Zurich and also EWORA board member Sarah Springman for making the conference successful. She is an outstanding colleague, and we really enjoy working with her and her team. Since March 2020, we are all living in and experiencing different way of life that we have not been familiar before. Working from home, trying to save ourselves from the virus, worrying about our families, ourselves, our students, and the whole world, changing all the practices that we used to do in our normal lives under the conditions of COVID-19 pandemic. At the beginning, we were confused, worried, and felt helpless. It was the first time in our lives we are facing such a global health problem. Then we started to observe what kind of changes occurring around us, especially in higher education and research area, and what kind of problems that universities and university leaders are facing under these circumstances. As a first step, we decided to organize a questionnaire for women university leaders and try to understand what's happening in universities and if there is any possibility to help university leadership to solve these emerging problems. I would like to thank all the participating rectors for devoting their precious time to our questionnaire and following us for further...
A doua din stânga.
Toată sala.
Okay, I would like to thank all the participating rectors for devoting their precious time to our questionnaire and powering us for further actions to help our membership. The first webinar is devoted to the first step of this endeavor: what's happening in universities under pandemic conditions. General Secretary of EWORA, Hulya Caglayan, is going to share our analysis of results of the questionnaire, and I'm happy to have Professor Eileen, a member of EWORA Scientific Advisory Board, with us as the discussant and moderator of this session. I would like to thank her devoting her very limited time for this session. Thank you so much, Eileen. After the presentation and contribution of Professor Eileen, we will have a short Q&A session. I hope, dear colleagues, I hope this webinar will be fruitful for all of us and will encourage our members to join the following ones. The second webinar will be focusing on the theme blended learning. It will be organized in January 2021 by Sarah Springman, Director of ETH Zurich. The third webinar on pandemic and work-life balance will be organized in March 2021 by Kerstin Pham, Director of Malmö University. I am thankful to both of them for accepting to lead these 2 important forthcoming EWORA webinars. As we have limited time, I don't want to take your time, so I would like to invite Hulya Caglayan to give her presentation. So, floor is yours, Hulya. There is no floor anyway.
Thank you so much, and I hope now you can all see my screen. So let me start with actually what we all know, that this coronavirus emerged at the end of last year in Wuhan and spread rapidly and it became a global threat within a few weeks. Since then, pandemic has been a tremendous challenge for all of us. And it has also triggered a rapid change process in higher education and research area in Europe and in the world, actually. So all the actions and activities of the universities have been replanned due to the pandemic. And university leaders have had to take rapid decisions to reshape all the educational and research activities in their universities and to coordinate such a massive effort as closing entire education systems. Within this period, the importance of strategic planning and management at universities are once again highlighted. It has been reported that by the end of March 2020, nearly 150 countries have closed all educational institutions. And UNESCO report published on May 2020 described the sudden and massive change as follows. The efforts made to continue teaching courses in virtual mode have been notable everywhere. And given the lack of experience with similar situations in the past, transfer has not been so easy. Here in this slide, we are seeing various quotes from the leaders of academia who shared their experiences at the very beginning of the pandemic. For instance, one vice president from MIT is stating that most academics who were teaching in the current semester still have to scramble to work out how to move their materials online when the pandemic hit, she says. Another vice provost states her experience as instructors scrambled to set up remote learning option for more than 40,000 students. Another one, the former rector of Utrecht University, is also stating that the pandemic is speeding up changes in a tremendous way. And interestingly, he also compared this sudden and unique case with what happened in the Black Death. So let us continue with what students shared at that time. It was again a very first shock stated by Nicholas Young, who is a PhD candidate. He's saying that I had just parked and started walking to class when the text came. All classes would be taught online starting at noon. At first, I couldn't believe the news. Was the text message legitimate? He was questioning. And on the other hand, there are also vulnerable groups in regard to especially the accommodation in the campus. We see that a growing number of universities have asked students to pack up and leave campus indefinitely. And that presents a problem for the significant fraction of students who depend on their school for basic needs such as food, housing, financial aid, health insurance, and on-campus jobs. While talking about these vulnerable groups who have been affected much more than others, we should also talk about the vulnerability of women in pandemic. Women are often considered as one of the most vulnerable to the effects of global crises such as financial deprivation, climate change, natural disasters, or pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic is not just a health issue, as one of the UN Women report says. It's a profound shock to our societies and economies, and women are at the heart of care and response efforts underway. So one of the reasons behind this vulnerability of women made us, this vulnerability is that made us all to stay at home. And home is already a gendered space where inequalities are starting from. Accordingly, female academics have confronted with additional constraints due to the COVID-19 and in their career progression. Instead of writing papers, they are likely to devote time to homeschooling children and doing household work. And these months of heavier duties may increase the distance between them and their male and childless peers, unfortunately. So here are some quotes from academic women, how they describe this period. For instance, one academic is saying that I work several hours after my children go to bed, being less productive and having less time for myself. Another one saying that I record lessons for my students to watch online. Minimizing background noise is a must. But my son is 2 years old. In the first lesson I tried to record, you can clearly hear his toy trumpet playing during the last 2 slides of the presentation. So, women's remarks are pointing out that women's research productivity is getting decreased, and the results of this widening in the gender gap may have much more visible consequences in later years. And in fact, journal editors have already reported in April that women who inevitably shoulder a great share of family responsibilities seem to be submitting fewer papers. And so far, we have discussed that pandemic is hitting disadvantaged groups, including women, and deepening the inequalities for women. But what about the power of women? Women leadership has been brought to the attention of the broader public in various news articles, mentioning several women political leaders are managing this crisis more effectively. It has been recognized, for example, that leaders of Germany, New Zealand, Iceland, Taiwan have acted quickly and decisively in response to the coronavirus. Maybe we have participants from these countries and they may comment later on this observation. We should also note that number of countries led by women is very limited and the effects of pandemic in each country is still in change. Thus, it may be difficult to refer to a recent comparative data. But in any case, I think we can at least say that pandemic has made women leadership much more visible. And studies mainly suggest two reasons for understanding women's better performance while leading their countries during pandemic. The first one is they are more willing to take risks when compared to men, and the second one is they have better communication skills. On the contrary, unlike women political leaders, women are noticeably less visible in the flurry of scientific publishing on the pandemic. Women's voices are being heard less in the scientific response to the pandemic. So once again, here, bringing a gender lens to the scientific leadership is gaining a vital importance to be discussed further while discussing the gender dimension of the pandemic. I guess we all see male experts around talking on the pandemic. So, what we have done. All of these discussions around gender and pandemic made EWORA to carry out a survey with the aim of learning more about the experiences of women leaders in academia during this change process due to coronavirus. The survey has been conducted between May 2020 and July 2020. This questionnaire has been disseminated among active female rectors and vice chancellors, mostly among European countries, but not limited to this region only. And it has been distributed via an email campaign, and there were 5 open-ended questions. The first question was asking about the main challenges. The second one asking the strategies, the new strategies they have employed. The third one was looking for some good practices and asked about the successful areas they experienced. The fourth and fifth one was related to the gender dimension of the crisis. So we have received 11 responses. Unfortunately, the calculation of a correct response rate is not possible for us as the database of active women rectors is not reflecting an exact number of rectors who received our invitation. This is because it is very difficult to keep the database up to date, and we are not sure who is still at leading position and who had a chance to personally receive it. And the number of received responses was limited, but as one of the respondents shared, it was a time questionnaire in a period where rectors are very. Also, some of the respondents remarked that currently they may not have enough data to provide answers.
Julia, Julia, I think you have to kick out Ricardo Guillem, who just entered and seems like being a troll. Silence him.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, sorry, I had my mic on. I didn't mean to be a troll. I'm going to shut my mic. Sorry.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So the number of received responses was limited, and because the survey was open-ended, and as one of the respondents shared, it was a time-devoting questionnaire in a period where rectors have been so busy. And some of the respondents also remarked that they may not have enough data to provide answers, especially related to gender impact of the pandemic. Now, what is the main challenge? All respondents clearly stated that the main challenge was the sudden shift to the distance education, as I already shared about at the very beginning. And one of the respondents summarized this very quick transformation as follows. We had to change to distance learning and to home office from one day to the next. The sudden change was at first a shock for both the staff and the students. Two of the respondents also mentioned about the challenges on future planning of the education systems, and there was only one respondent who also highlighted that online teaching is not as effective as on-site education, and I think this could be another point to be discussed further. So the new strategies and the adjustments the rectors mentioned about, respondents mainly focused on the difficulties caused by the online education, which also necessitated new arrangements for online examinations and course evaluations. And thus, there was one respondent who paid attention to an important subject that puts forward how the impact of pandemic varies in different geographies, different contexts. She's saying that it was necessary to solve the issue of establishing feedback. It is confirmed that only 30% of students have problems with regular internet connections. Here, we can observe that the pandemic is having different effects on different groups of people, as we talked before, as there were other respondents who state that they have strong infrastructure in terms of the digital toolkits being needed during the process. So, sorry. Yes. And the other two concepts that are emerging from the responses were, the first one was about blended learning, that it is being discussed and planned while reorganizing all the educational systems. And second one is like total digital learning, if the future of higher education will be digital learning, they were asking and sharing about. So we observed that university leaders have had a very unique and challenging experience, but have achieved successful results in responding rapidly and with real focus to the immediate crisis, as stated by a respondent. Some other examples that are shared as good practices by the rectors are organizing online trainings for faculty members and students for a smooth transition to the distance learning, developing mobile applications for digital learning, and getting funds for COVID-related research. Now, the impact on gender equality in universities. There were, interestingly, 3 sharp responses sharing that the pandemic has not affected gender equality in universities. That means there were no need for designing any gender-inclusive policies. This indicates that although hundreds of reports, articles, or news have been published on the gender results of the pandemic, it is still vital to make them visible, especially for decision makers. I think it is still vital to create awareness on the subject. On the other hand, the majority, 7 respondents, shared that although there is no quantitative data, they observed that women have been more affected by the demands of childcare and caring responsibilities. And there was only one respondent who stated that she will be not able to answer this question without basing it on a research. And I think this is important to conclude that we still need more research, more quantitative data on this subject. The impact, again, the impact on gender equality universities, there are 2 more interesting quotes. One is saying that, one is intending that not only female, but male academics and students may have also disproportionately impacted by the pandemic due to their caring responsibilities. And one female rector, also shared an important data that she is observing that we see, in her words, we see much less publications and grant writing from our female scientists and scholars. So I think the data is there, but more research needs to get done. Gender inclusive policies. Although majority of the respondents claim that women are more likely to be negatively affected by pandemic, there were only 3 respondents who shared that they are applying gender inclusive policies so far. And let me read their what they have stated. We are being very flexible. We are being very flexible on our approaches to work and have supported staff with equipment to help. Women have been more affected by the demands of childcare and caring responsibilities more broadly. We have directly acknowledged that we will take this into account in future promotions. One other respondent also highlighted another important subject, that they are especially designing strategies for single-parent families. Now, let us open another discussion, as there was an interesting quote from one of the rectors, that when it is asked about the gendered impact of the pandemic, there was a response raising this discussion, if working remotely could be a better chance for women or not. For instance, joining in digital meetings could be a time saver. You don't need to make any arrangements for traveling, for example. And is it possible that it is helping work-life balance instead of damaging it? So this could be another point to be discussed in our future discussions, I guess. And here you see an automated email that is being sent by a businesswoman that I think this is a good strategy to handle during the coronavirus lockdown time. That she's seeing that due to patriarchy, I'm behind in emails and I hope to respond to your message soon. But like many women, I am working full-time while tending to an infant and toddler full-time. So I like her strategy. Now, let us continue with discussing some of the reasons that make female political leaders better at managing this crisis. All respondents agreed that female political leaders have been more successful in this crisis management. And here are some of the reasons the respondents of the questionnaire listed. Empathy, clarity of communication, listening to others. Again, empathy, once more emphasized. Value-based leadership, also emphasized. One another respondent saying that women are practical and fearless. And another one saying that female political leaders might have quick decisions and apply the regulations very quickly. So here we again see that empathy, communication, and being quick are seen that women leaders like having much more when compared to men at decision-making levels. So what could be the possible solutions or gender-sensitive responses for reducing gender inequalities being deepened by the pandemic? Extending the 10-year clock or extending the deadlines could be some strategies that can be employed by decision makers. For instance, many universities in Canada now allow researchers to stop their 10-year clocks if the pandemic has impacted their research. Some other recommendations that we can list in order to contribute to the challenges that women are being faced. The first one is that institutions, countries should carry out special research in their own social, cultural, institutional context to fully recognize the disadvantaged groups who are disproportionately affected by the pandemic when compared to others. The voices, the experiences of female academics should be much more visible to be able to portray the new challenges and the opportunities they have faced during this period. Financial opportunities should be created to support various research on gender analysis and female leadership during global crisis. The research by female scientists in the field of pandemic should also be made much more visible. And strategies that decision makers are applying for a gender-sensitive management of the crisis should be exchanged among leaders, and best practices should be made visible. Gender parity should be achieved in all decision-making positions, and women should be included in the crisis management. Family-friendly policies should be designed and implemented according to these new life patterns. So, as Lucio says, no leadership behavior is inherently gendered. It is developed over time. Therefore, more research should be carried out on how gender affects leadership styles. For instance, why and how women are better at empathetic leadership or better at open communication. And how are we going to realize women's potential power and talent into action? We may rather choose to have an optimistic perspective as a concluding word, as this pandemic may also help to recognize the significance of women's empowerment in society's academia and leadership. Also, I think this period, the pandemic period, the lockdown period also showed us, created awareness that how there is an unbalanced distribution of labor within the houses. So let me conclude with stating from a quote from a very recent article published on the issue. COVID-19 can be another such opportunity for greater gender equality in the workplace. For this to be achieved, we need to stop apologizing for personal lives and let's see more children on conference calls. And I thank you for your participation. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much, Hulya. It was a rather long presentation. Thank you very much. And now floor is Eileen, for you, dear Eileen, Drew.
Can I ask to share my screen because I couldn't do it beforehand?
Yeah, I paused mine, so I think
Yep.
you're not able to share.
So is that showing up on?
Mhm.
Okay, and I just want it in presentation mode. So on behalf of all our audience, our growing audience, I want to say thank you very much for such a wonderful and comprehensive presentation. I'm in the difficult position of needing to respond and react when you have raised so many of the issues and covered so much ground. And I think it's excellent that you've done that. There'll be plenty to discuss. So I'm really going to draw together some strands and set open then the discussion that will follow my talk. So thank you again for this opportunity. Now, yes, I thought this quote rather summed up where we're at. We are all in the same storm, but not in the same boat. And as with every aspect of professional and indeed personal life, there are twin tracks. There's a male way and there's a female way. And I'm seeing that now applying in all of the coverage of the COVID crisis, that instead of evening up the playing field, we seem to be seeing yet more impediments put in our way. Hence, we're not in the same boat. So I thought before thinking specifically about COVID, it's no harm to remind ourselves that we were already up against quite a wall, a ceiling, a wall, whatever we want to call it, in terms of a lot of barriers were already in place preventing gender equality. I think we have to be aware that increasingly education is seen as a commodity. And it's under similar pressures, I think, to private sector companies and corporations. So that commodification of tertiary education has made for a reinforcement of what we can measure. Those key performance indicators, where are we in the rankings? What's your H index? All of these have become increasingly important and added to what was already a very competitive environment. In fact, a very masculine, it has to be said, environment pertaining in all our institutions. So competition for staff, for students and resources has always put us a little bit at a catch-up situation and made life increasingly difficult. And that has in turn been accompanied by or caused by the economic pressures, the underfunding of the education sector, which I think is probably true of all our countries that are represented at this webinar. So that pressure has led to trying to find shortcuts, trying to find technological solutions, but it's also put pressure on things like staff-student ratios, and we'll see some of the impact of that in another point. The gallop towards internationalization, which may now be impeded by COVID and its consequences, and as we've already noted, that blended learning. I'm very glad that we'll be discussing this at a later EWORA gathering. And of course, all of these
Excuse me, Eileen, the slides don't seem to pass on. It seems to be the first one still.
Oh. I don't know what's happening there, because I was just going to conclude.
You have to put it into the display mode. It's like we don't see it in the PowerPoint.
Okay. Why is it paused? Resume share.
Yes.
I think it automatically switched to something there, but because I was reading my bullet points, I didn't realize what had happened. But certainly I didn't deliberately do that. So these were already the barriers that we faced and that contributed to the leaky pipeline and that lack of career progression, or blocks and impediments to the career progression of women. And then on screen comes the next slide. So COVID hasn't, in a sense, created a new situation. It has gone into an existing one and exacerbated it. So we have to be aware of there were existing inequalities, and think about, I believe, acknowledging and getting the research to show, is this happening on the ground? Is it happening universally? Have some universities, some countries been better at being able to respond and have it rectified? We've well-documented evidence of highly gendered allocation of academic workloads. And this is a voice coming through in the COVID responses, that women are put under additional pressures, being in charge of a lot of, disproportionately in charge of more heavier teaching load, a heavier pastoral load. And as we've already noted, men are still seen as the experts, particularly when discussing COVID or discussing politics and political leadership, etc., and election campaigns. We do still see men coming out, taking the floor and dominating in that discussion. So again, something we really do need to rectify. And what was always seen as a leak in the pipeline is now being called a hemorrhage. I think particularly that debate and that discourse is coming from United States, North American universities, but I think it would be very interesting from a European perspective to say, are we going to see a replication of that in terms of our female faculty, particularly tenured female faculty? So the timing of tenure and promotion and grant applications is very important. So we're talking about really the whole phenomenon of precarity, the large build of postdoctoral migrant worker researchers that are almost required to move around Europe, and the pressures that places to find a tenured position by sometimes their early, sometimes mid-30s, very difficult. The scramble for limited promotion opportunities, and that's bound up very much with putting in grant applications to get those. So the news is coming through that women are again falling behind on these. So that's very, very troubling. Women's representation amongst university leaders continues, like the world stage and world politics, a small minority, very significant contributors within that minority, but still a small pool. And of course, the very important message that's come out in the presentation about the gendering of care. It's the women's voices that are being quoted to say, I'm juggling with X and Y and Z, and it's my work that's being interrupted, even when both parents may be resident at home. So there's a real problem there. So this is now putting the ball back in your court. European university leaders need to realize that how they deal with academics as care providers now will directly impact on how the professoriate will look in 5 to 10 years from now. How diverse will it be? How many more women will there be in positions of power within academia? So I think that's an important question that we should keep in mind, that the actions taken now will have very, very significant consequences for the future. So call for action, and I think this is why we feel we've gathered around this table, looking at what can be done, what is being done. I suppose taking the cue from Hulya, are there any positive lessons? Is there anything to be optimistic about? I think, Gulsun, you've already referred to the conference commuting, that to be somewhere for a half day means maybe 2 days additionally trying to get there. But even on a daily basis, getting to a workplace, certainly I can remember in the height of my commuting, it was taking 3 hours of my day. And that's an incredibly disproportionate waste of time. So quite apart also from the costs of commuting. So what are we starting to see now? An end to presenteeism, that you can only do your job if your light is on in your office and you're the last to leave, and this competition to be present and to be visibly present. Have we somehow now overcome that? And what would the consequences be? What we were also seeing, and I think the cartoon picked up on it, you know, the appearance of little people on Zoom calls, that delineation between work and family has become less sustainable. It's not possible. And yet people came to work in the pretense that they had no family commitments, and vice versa, going home to families and not admitting that actually they're really jaded because of their full-time job. So the conference meetings, I think, Gulsun, you really summed that up. Is this a mad scramble? And I think attendance at conferences, particularly in a global world, and some of the best international conferences were very difficult if you had young children, and I speak from my heart there. So again, maybe this is a more sensible way of networking and exchanging information and working collaboratively, supported, of course, by Zoom and others, other applications and supports in place, Microsoft Teams and these other ones, and platforms that are emerging to help to bring messages around and pass them very, very quickly. Another, I'm just putting it out because I think it's certainly an appropriate time to think about it. Could there be some sort of renegotiation of domestic and caring work in the home? Because certainly, why should it all be only mothers have interruptions when they are juggling with that role? And a new role perhaps in which university leaders and aspiring leaders take their lead from this and say, how do we best reduce the damage of COVID's impact in our sector and yet maximize what could be? So remedies, I think, have been already touched upon. Certainly the literature puts much more emphasis on the pain rather than how we respond to it. One suggestion was that the pandemic period be considered carer leave. But again, I think that might be divisive, might lead to resentment by non-carers. The suspension of end-term student evaluations. I think this is a major preoccupation in North American universities. I'm not sure how important it is, but certainly the literature suggests that women are more susceptible to getting more negative evaluation, even from female students. Should that be suspended? Will this be the opportunity to maybe do that? We need to revisit those already very uneven workload allocations so that women get time to put their research back on track. And perhaps we need to rethink the whole benchmarking of what really counts. H indexes became obsessional in terms of selection, the weight of your application. So it was really volume and not necessarily quality that was being measured. So I think maybe we need to rethink about those measurements and what they are really leading to in terms of appointments and promotions and leadership positions. And finally, thinking about caregiving as a much more noble role and much more collectively done by partners as equals within families, which now of course has been under stress, and within the community and society at large. We've parked it, and as academic professionals, we've perhaps allowed that to stay under the surface as a highly gendered allocation of our energies. And I think it needs to come out from under wraps. So I'm just ending again on a very positive note. I think it's very important to say a crisis such as we now face requires that we draw upon and from the intellect of the full population. And so I think part of that energy and invitation is where I hand over to you and ask for responses, questions, reactions from all of you as the audience, because that gathering of minds such as we've got in this forum is a very, very important opportunity. So I'm, for one, really looking forward to hearing what the discussion is going to bring out. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eileen. You have touched very important points, and especially I like the positive lessons list. So I think we should not be pessimistic. We should be optimistic. What are the gains from this game? You know. So thank you so much. Now, would you please moderate the question and answer session as well, Eileen?
Very happy to. Thank you. Thank you very much. So who would like to lead off? We have at least 30 people, I think, still with us. And so I ask you to just keep your responses fairly short so that we get round as many of all of you as possible. I'd really look forward to hearing your views. So who's going to start? If you put your hand up and then I can say who's going to speak next. Please.
Nobody? Well, I may open the discussion on the mobility opportunities. I've been quite a number of years in the advisory board of Maria Skłodowska-Curie Action Advisory Board. And one of the main problem is to increase the mobility of female academics, because they were facing with difficulties in leaving their home when they are married with children, and it was really a big problem. And at the end, we have reached some over 30% rate of female academics for mobility programs. So that was a a good result at that time. But I believe that now we are equal with men because of this limited mobility opportunities. Well, this is not good maybe to think in that way, but it created more opportunity for female academics to be in the equal conditions. But of course, there should be new ways of revitalizing the new type of mobility in the coming years, because mobility is very important to make the people to see different atmosphere, to meet with different people, to see different research atmosphere in different universities. But I think now we will start a new era where we are going to create a new way of mobility. What do you think about this? New way. Can you give us a clue? Have you thought about this issue before? As I was in the this Marie Curie program, so I starting from the pandemic, it occurred to me that this create additional chances to female academics.
Would somebody like to respond to that? Maybe somebody who's had experience of either being the mobile fellow, Marie Curie fellow themselves, or being their research supervisor or PI. I certainly have a strong view on this one, but I don't want to. Good, please do come in. Yeah.
Let me start the discussion, because I face the problem of mobility almost all days. It happens that in my research group, I have only one man colleague, and 10 young women responsible not only for research, but responsible for their families. And the mobility is one of the possibility of creating any mobility is quite difficult these days. And I think that the only efficient way of doing this these days is to have strong connections with several research groups where this mobility can be treated in less formal way. So we can not follow very formal rules of Maria Skłodowska-Curie or any other actions where you are obliged to spend some time and you have funds for special activities, but when you can individualize the mobility. And for this is what is really important. It is trust, long-term collaboration, mutual joint interests of the groups in the collaboration. I think this is not a case of Maria Skłodowska-Curie. This is not the case of Erasmus. So we have to rethink also the major question of the Erasmus mobility in Europe afterwards. And for this, smaller but stronger links could be very efficient way of doing this. I can say that I have collaboration with two groups, one in Portugal, one in Italy, and with people we have mutual interest for a long time. We can arrange it. We can arrange it even for women with toddlers or very small children, where this collaboration can be. We used online collaboration, online exchange between these groups also before pandemic. But for this, we need trust, strong links, and mutual projects.
Thank you. Any other views on that or other topic? Can you raise your hand or switch off your mute, and I'll hand over to the next speaker. Yes, Pilar, and then Zehra. Yeah. If you unmute. Pilar? We can't hear you. Can anybody else hear?
No, I cannot hear her.
Okay. I think, Pilar, can I turn to Zehra and ask you to make sure you unmute? Yeah, please take the floor.
Okay, I would like to thank for the two very interesting presentations and covering wide range of topics. Two things sort of stayed with me. One of them is what you mentioned, Eileen, about long-term effects on cadre, really the positions that women may want to get to in some years. I guess this is something, do you know at all if there is any action taken for to ease this pressure on women in different universities, or have you come across examples of it that they may actually do they really freeze tenure tracks and things like that in order to protect women?
Certainly, I can't say that I've come across any, either really positive news, but neither is there negative news. And I just want to give a plug to Trinity College Dublin. We'll be electing our new provost, our president of our university next year. And at the moment, there are 4 female candidates and 1 man. Last time there was only 1 female candidate, and she was just beaten by our outgoing provost. So I think that certainly COVID has not put any curb on the enthusiasm for taking that role. And when I say there are 4 women, they are really excellent. I can't speak for the man. So I think that talking about women leadership, the political leadership, and people like Jacinda Ardern and that, I think what women demonstrate, the empathy is very important, but that kind of resilience, I think it's just in our makeup that you adapt to whatever the circumstances are, and there is that bounce back. So I think keeping women in the fold is, to me, one of the very, very important areas, and then creating the mutual supports to help see them progress up the ranks. I don't know if other people would share my optimism about that, but my view is very colored by my own university.
Yeah, I think it is important because women do take on more at this point in time. And they also, Hulya's work showed that they publish less at the moment, and they are scientifically less visible. So this will indeed, if this situation continues a bit longer, even if it's only a bit longer, it will affect their careers, I think. So it's important to recognize it. And the other point I wanted to make was what you just said about women in leadership positions, that they are being a very good example, I think. And this is something that we can all hang on to and support and imitate, really, in many different ways. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Pilar, did you want to come in still?
Can you hear me now? Yes, yes. Okay, great. Well, thanks a lot, Hulya and Eileen, for these wonderful presentations. I really enjoyed them, and I wanted to continue with the issue of mobility that Gulsun mentioned. I think is really important, and as it's been said, maybe we could change, and instead of making it the time of stay in a place, the prerequisite, to have some goals, make it goal oriented. Like, these are the research goals you have to follow, irrespective of the time you spend in the place, because it turns into an economic issue, really. To conduct research here in Spain too, you have to go to, well, everywhere, you have to go somewhere else, another university. And I remember I had to take my kids with me. You have to deal with scholars there, how in schools, how you register them, what's all the process, and you have to pay for the rent, to pay. I mean, it's an economic issue, really, to do that. Not just time, not just family, it's a lot. And very important, something you mentioned, Eileen, that I think it's the fact that depending on how we take care of academics now, this is the academics we will have in 5-10 years. So if we could deal with this at present, maybe in 5-10 years, women would be not at a different position to men with respect to mobility, for instance. That was it. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very important point, that the age at which you're expected to be highly mobile is exactly when you could be forming a family, or you're in your first or second stable relationship, and do we really have to physically up and go? It's to me reminiscent of medieval stonemason workers who would go around church to church around Europe to where the next edifice was being built, selling their wares. And I just think, is that appropriate in this age of information technology? Do we really need to do that, and to make it so disruptive? I think it really does contribute to that exit after doctoral and postdoctoral, where the women fall off the edge in the scissors diagram. Mm-hmm. So if we can find some imaginative alternatives, like collaborative research that doesn't have to be in the same lab.
Yes.
Collaborative relationships between teams of and supervisor, supervisee, and much more, I think we're now recognizing can be done remotely.
May I?
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you very much. This is actually the first time I joined a meeting, because I had the great idea to join EWORA just before the first lockdown, so I couldn't attend anything at the moment. So my name is Alessia, and I'm the Vice Dean of the French National School of Public Health, and very happy of sharing all this with you. At the same time, I'm a member of the Equivalent Association in France, and so some of the most that I have to say of the issues that Eileen and Hulya tackled actually are the same and discussed in the national, of course, arena here. There's one thing that I would like to suggest that we as a collective move on really practically is at one of the last slides of Hulya, when she mentioned some of the proposals that probably came out of the 11 respondents. It's the best practice sharing system. That is to say, as we all are in a position where we can implement things in our schools or universities, and even beyond, why don't we think of a way to share these best practices? Like, we could simply have a website where we post them, but it's not very efficient probably. But I was thinking maybe we could create a prize or something that could encourage people who have implemented efficiently measures to solve this gender inequality to apply, and then we give them a reward, whatever. It doesn't need to be money. I suspect that a public reward would already be something good. But at the same time, this will allow us to know who is doing what and promote it and give visibility and then be inspired. So I don't know, I was thinking that maybe there is something that EWORA could do to follow up on this great suggestion. And the other thing is that we could have the same thinking on the research. Like, we could imagine creating sponsor a research project on how the female leadership made a difference or not in the COVID handling. Like, this will be a long-term research, but I'm not sure there is anything that has been started in a comparative dimension on how basically did universities with the female leadership, did they do better, or did they do it different? Or did they take into account, let's say, mental health in a different way, or promote gender equality in a different way during the pandemic? I don't know. This is just an idea. This is probably more complex to make it. Probably it requires funding, but I'd love to see these things implemented. That's all.
That sounds like a very interesting piece of research. It would be very, very informative indeed. And again, back to the optimistic, being upbeat and optimistic, I think it's always better to concentrate on the solutions and the remedies and how we address it, rather than to actually get bogged down in the misery of it. And we all live through that, so we all need to see some light at the end of the tunnel. So Gulsun, would you have a view on that one also?
Well, I completely agree with you. I have a kind of a character that I'm always optimistic. I think that there should be a way, to solve the problem. And this is a real challenge, especially for women academics, because we have been suffering from many obstacles, barriers. And now, in a way, we became equal, equal barriers now affecting all male and female academics. So we can be, creative to design new ways of, mobility, new ways of communication, and new ways of research teams to be, more successful. There is a tendency, I feel from myself, that women are always, you know, very good in crisis times, you know, management of crisis. It's always women have much better, you know, performance. But on the other hand, women are ready in crisis times to sacrifice themselves. You know, they put their time and energy without waiting direct, you know, benefit to themselves, but to the community that they serve. So this is also common feature for females. So I don't know how to, you know, combine and, you know, balance these two things, you know, being successful in crisis management, but at the same time, not, you know, sacrificing their own, you know, benefits altogether. You know, there should be a balance in order to cope with the inequality problems. So I think we have lots of things to be done in front of us now, and there are lots of research areas emerged. It seems that this, even if this pandemic fade away, I hope there will not be anyone coming in, but we have to be ready as a, you know, world community, how to deal with this kind of, you know, problems, and how to adjust ourselves to the changing conditions in order to be more successful than before, you know, using the new conditions to be more successful, to be optimistic, to be able to find out the, you know, very interesting point to design new ways of life in our planet. So maybe the future will be much more bright than today. So that's my expectation, really. I don't know if I was able to answer your question or your expectation. Okay. So is there any other? Is Eileen your
Anna,
microphone?
Sojta from Poland.
Yeah.
So I think that when we look at our activities, I think that we can divide it into two streams of actions. The one stream is immediate action, which we should introduce immediately at the universities. For example, home and workload. That because it is very disability, especially for the young women, and assistance with a lot of education hours and a lot of work still in laboratories because there are grants are going on. So so I think that we should be very we should put some pressure, or even if the male is is a rector, so we have to do it immediately. And there are other actions which we can use for the bright future. For example, we can use these for the open science, open education platforms and other actions, because I think that they are very, very, very precious. So if we have, for example, open education, and my lectures will be available for everyone all over the world, and the other lectures will be also available, and we can share that, taking, for example, ECTS points for the weight of them. So I think that it would be very, very good start point to creation a new academic collaboration all over the world. So, but I think that now because for example, in Poland now we are in the phase of total lockdown. So and the most duties are for the women and the young women. I mean PhD students and a little bit older. So now we are going back to the point then which we would like to overcome, that we would like to increase the percentage of women for the higher in their academic career pathway on the higher position. So now we are again in a danger that these the women at that age will be stopped. So I think that this needs immediate action. So thank you, and thank you so much for this discussion. I think that, yeah, I am always I'm really very impressed. So thank you so much.
Are there other comments or responses that we can take? Some people are on camera and some people are not, just so I can only see some of you. Hello, Rosemary, please.
Yeah, I wanted to say something about the importance of leaders listening to doctoral researchers, actually. I know they've come up a few times, but in a way, they're kind of very much affected by COVID. And if they don't navigate their way through that successfully, they're not going to be the next generation of women academics or leaders, because they're just going to give up and go and do something else. And I think that, I think a lot of institutions have tried very hard to help those people, but of course it costs money. I also think they might have some good ideas about mobility. I mean, already some European universities are talking about virtual mobility and blended mobility. So maybe we have to start thinking of different conceptions of mobility, and possibly you can have a blended version where maybe you only need to go somewhere for a few days just so that you can meet people, but the rest of it can be done as we're doing this through video conferences and other tools that I'm sure will develop in the future that are probably even easier to use. But I do think it's that sense of, if we don't take on board those researchers and what they think about it, they have some good ideas, but people don't always think of listening to them, or they say, oh, they're only concerned with themselves. But in doing that, they probably do have some good ideas about how we might develop in the future. The other challenge, I think, for universities is that whatever we do now, because people are so pressed for time, the question is, how do we make people see equality issues as a priority, as opposed to something that can just be dumped because, well, we've got all this online learning, we've got this, we've got, people complaining about things, we've got all these difficult things to do, we haven't got time. But unless, as you said, unless we make time for those things and we actually start to plan something, then things will just get worse rather than better, and that's something none of us would want. So I think it's trying to find a route in which there is a kind of time and a space where people can actually think about it. Because I think that's what's disappearing at the moment. A lot of people say, well, you can get through all the things you have to get through, even if you have to stay up all night. But what is going is any sense of creativity. And so we need to find a way of bringing back that creativity, even if it's only like, an hour a week or something. And I think that would make quite a difference.
One thing that occurred to me about your first point is maybe that could be one of the sub-themes in the webinar, the upcoming webinar about blended learning and blended research collaboration. So perhaps, Gulsun, would that be feasible, do you think? Because that mobility issue is, I think, very critical.
Well, Sarah Springman is going to structure the next webinar, but we will inform her about this idea. So I think she will take into account. Okay. So we can, there is Kirsten is asking if it is possible to share presentations. I think it's okay. Yeah, we can share them, no problem.
And I think, Christina, did you want to come in?
There is my microphone, I think. Okay, you can hear me now? Well, I think it's been fascinating to listen to all the presentations and the discussions. And I feel I'm far beyond being part of the academic community, but I think what will stay with me, I think, are the ever ongoing problems for the young women who are starting their academic career. So what I would wish is, my wish is that many of you can take on efforts to safeguard the possibilities for the young women entering their careers or being very early in their careers. I think that has been an ongoing problem. It has never been solved, of course, but this pandemic is making it so much worse. And I think many of your intervention has clarified that. And so among all these issues that have been raised, for me, that is a very, very important topic. I've been working on it in various ways in Sweden. I could see we made some breakthroughs, but I'm afraid that this situation will move things backward. So if I may just send this message along, take every care you can, every effort to safeguard young women early in their careers. And thank you for a very nice and interesting seminar.
And thank you again for reinforcing that. One thing that was going through my mind that I think was the story of my professional life was as soon as I got to a certain point, they've moved the goalposts. That's a nice way of expressing it. And then I just thought, well, there's another way of looking at that. Why aren't we moving goalposts? Why do we assume that it's going to be something will happen and the hurdles and whatever ceilings are imposed on us? I think we need to be really proactive about what kind of academic institutions we want to see in the future, and how should they be led, how they should be managed, and how the impracticability, the difficulties of reconciling work and family. Surely we have great thinkers in our institutions. We should be able to get around that. And let's just not leave it to the men to move those goalposts.
This is a big change project. This is a big change project. I believe we should be the change agents of this project. So we should be taking the job over. That's the main question, if we can do it or not. But I hope we will. Okay, I think Minetan is.
Yes, and thank you very much for this very, very nice meeting. I'm very glad to see you all. I was just thinking about the humanitarian issues. Of course, all issues are humanitarian in a way, but the more humanitarian issues in the background, do we think that this situation is going to be over soon, or do we believe it will be a temporary situation? If it is temporary, as I think when we're thinking about mobility and other issues, when we offer or think about remedies, we're thinking that people won't be able to travel, to see one another, to touch one another in the other countries, experience other cultures. That is the human touch behind the whole idea of university education is going to disappear. This is a frightening issue for me, because when we think that we're going to be teaching and learning this way, it's going to be rather an eerie situation. So it's not an optimistic way of looking at things, but still it's one of the issues, I think.
May I respond?
Yeah.
So, even if this is this pandemic will fade away and we will go back to normal life, as we have already had this experience, it will create a big impact on our next activities. even if it fades away. So, I'm looking at this opportunity. Of course, this is a very annoying time that we are living in, but it will create some positive impacts on our future way of living. And think about what's the percentage of the people who are traveling all over the world? Well, they are limited. There is a limited number of people who have that opportunity. But the digital world creates a lot of opportunities for the people who are, using those, films and, videos to learn more about the world. So this is very widely spread issue, So, I mean, in terms of equality, it will create more equal world, I believe, in the coming years. That's my belief, It is not, many opportunities were used by limited number of people, if you look at the whole world. Now, we will have new opportunities shared by many more people. That's my expectation.
Yes, I think that the human contact thing is something that we'll never dispense with, but I think that we'll have to find imaginative ways of making it safe and possible in whatever opportunities arise to be able to do that. I'm sure conferencing will still be happening, and we hope,
yes,
starting with Zurich, that we will be able to network in the proper way,
yes.
then too. So I think we shouldn't give up hope of some restoration of maybe the positives, and make sure that they are on our agenda.
Well,
may I say something?
Colette, please do.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm speaking from France. I guess most people don't know me. I'm a very good friend of Claudine, and we do work together on Women in Science and European Platform of Women Scientists. My remark is about the fact, this new world with code. Sorry, I'm going to start my video, okay? The connection is not very good. Anyway, so the new world here. What we noticed in France, and it's a lot of women professors complained, is that when they would organize a meeting, a conference, live stream conference, they will only be men. It's the same. Nothing's changed. It's not because that you do it, you don't have to travel and so on, but the same networks, the same kind of networking problems arise. Doesn't change. The same world. It's a live streamed world, but it's the same. So it's kind of, it's true for some people it's better, but when you see the academics, the academics world, it's the same. Nothing changed. The power is in the hands of men mostly, and then they do the same. They just take their friends. And if you want to speak up, it's very, very difficult if you're a woman. You cannot, just cannot. Thank you.
Would anybody like to challenge that one and say there is another possible future?
Well, I think in this to get the right of speaking in the meetings. That's my observation. I don't know if well, we have to do it. Nobody will create opportunities for us. We have to work for ourselves. We have to try to be active in the meetings and everywhere. Otherwise, nobody will stop and ask us, what's your opinion, you know, please, could you please share it with us? Well, we have to be, you know, proactive. Otherwise, we cannot solve the problem.
You just don't get invited.
Well, Christina Ulenius knows, we have a research policy. We had a research policy working group in EUA. In one of the meetings, I was the only female person. The rest were all men, you know. And there was a, you know, issue to be discussed in the meeting. And I was raising my hand, but the chairperson was not paying attention to me, you know. And he was always giving the, you know, word to our male colleagues. And then I suddenly put my hand on the table and asked them, in order to get a chance to speak, should I be a man? And then everybody started to laugh, you know. They didn't expect to have such, action from me. And then I had a chance to speak, and from that moment, I got better chance in that group to speak about, to express my thoughts and my ideas. So I think we have to take action, my dear colleague. Otherwise, if they keep talking and if we keep silent all the time, nobody will ask us, what's your opinion?
What I just said is just you don't get invited in meetings. So you have to organize your own meetings with your own friends, you know, colleagues, you know, that's really a problem, really. And that's the live stream meetings didn't change anything. The world is the same, is what I'm saying. It's not that we're not proactive. We are proactive. But if you somehow, our male colleagues, don't invite women. And you have to fight for them to just think, oh, okay, that's true, there are women who can do it. It's very, very difficult. Nothing's changed.
Well, Kirsten has just come in. Do you want to make that point outside of the...
But I mean that I think we have a lot of national meetings with rectors and so on in Sweden, and I think it's more equal now because it's easier. We can raise our hands and we can make comments and we are equal, more equal now, even if there is an imbalance between female and male rectors. So I think we can use this situation also, really. We should use it, be proactive now. Yeah.
Yes, Sarah, if you can unmute. Yeah.
Yeah. I will also be a little bit provocative and say, why don't we make use of the male colleagues who think like us? Because I don't think that 100% of them think women are incapable or not worth listening or not competent enough. So, and this is something I actually use quite a bit, to recruit them, to recruit male colleagues who are willing to acknowledge and see the position of women and get them also to promote for women's rights and what we need to defend. I think this is also very important because I don't believe that they're 100% against, and I also don't believe that this is something that can be achieved only by women. It's only when men also collaborate, cooperate, that this thing will work. So we have to find ways of getting them into this mindset. I would say this is very important.
Well, you know, I completely agree with you, but you know, we have been working on this issue for so many years, and we also try to defend our rights in our universities. And I have had a chance to be elected among 11 men candidates to be director of my university. And well, what I can say that we are working so much, but we have not been successful enough. So when I look at the case, I think that our efforts for gender equality may reach its targets if and only if women become aware of their rights and be ready to fight for them, you know, because we cannot fight for each woman in the world, you know. So, but if they become aware of their rights and be ready to fight for them, then there will be a big, you know, movement. We cannot, you know, have every woman because we are not in enough numbers, you know. So that's the problem. That's the problem.
I think
Tina and Carmen, you haven't spoken.
Yes. I couldn't agree more than these comments about men and women. Okay, we are women, we are fighting for ourselves, we have to be proactive, nobody will do it for us. But what really is amazing is that most men don't realize that this sexism is as bad for them as it is for us. So it's not, we are not taking any, well, we are taking a part of the pie, of course, but you know, any man who really doesn't feel happy in the patriarchal academia in which we live, they face the same discrimination as we do in many occasions. I mean, if they have to take leave because their children are sick, everybody looks at them in a bad way. So I think it's a matter of not asking men to help us as women, because it's not fair that we are discriminated, but that they realize that the system is not good for us, but it's not good for them either. So they should really join the fight for themselves, for their own sake. That's the way I see it.
Thank you, Carmen. And I think Christina, yes, you want to come back in?
Yes, please. I think Gulsun was talking about being an optimist, but now all I can hear is very pessimistic statements, and I feel very sad about that, because I think there are lots and lots of obstacles still. But when I look back to the 60s, when I started in the Institute of Technology in Stockholm, I mean, there weren't any women at all. And look at you now, sitting around this table, digital table. There are lots of you. And that would have been impossible in the 60s. So just remember, there's been great improvements. I'm not saying I'm happy about the situation, but we also have to recognize all the changes that have taken place. And I think I have encouraged women-only discussion groups and so on for women to gain strength from each other. But I don't think that's the way forward, because I think there has to be cooperation between men and women, or women and men, as I rather like to say. And of course, there are men in the academic community who recognize the sexism and the discrimination that is taking place, and they can be friends in combat, whatever you would like to call it. But I think we have moved forward. It's different in different countries. I think I'm speaking from a relatively good situation in Sweden, but still I think most European countries have seen great steps forward. And let's join forces with those men who understand the difficulties and the advantages that could be gained from changes in the academic community, to the changes that are necessary for women and men to go forward in their careers. We are trying to get fathers involved in childcare. And so, of course, these are issues that are shared between women and men. And let's be optimistic, it is possible, but it's a long time commitment. change has taken place. It will take place. Thank you.
Our duty is to accelerate the change, my dear.
Yeah, I also want to say something if I can. I totally agree that yes, we have to involve men. And yes, we have to avoid getting into the same problem, which I mean is that we promoted the creation, we created an office for gender equality here at university. And when we finally had the people from each of the schools selected someone, and I said, okay, so let's do it. Someone told me when I give it to be printed and for me to sign and so on, the creation of the new office, they said, I think that 6 women and just 1 man on an office for gender equality probably is not very nice. And I said, yes, you are right. We have to look for the men as well. And then we have it equilibrated. So I think that we have to be aware that a lot of change has occurred, but in fact, we have to get involved because the problem is from both sides. I mean, of course, we were discriminated, but of course it was their culture. And so we have the obligation to share this. I mean, in Portugal, it is changing a lot. When I think Yulan knows perfectly, Helena Nazaré, she was the first woman rector, and I was the second one, and now we have 5 already. So it is changing, in fact, but we have to be aware of getting men involved in this thing as well. I think this is quite important. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. It's nice to see you. What a beautiful university you have.
Yeah. Yes, my office is always very nice in Zoom meetings.
I've been there, yes.
Yes, it's true.
So Gulsun, are there any more contributions, or should we sort of end on, I think, a relatively positive and optimistic note? We have some ideas to take into future meetings, particularly the mobility issue and the leadership issue. And I think that that will help keep the momentum that we're seeing, and that we're not kind of defeated. And just remember those goalposts. Just think about where's the next goalpost I have to move, because we've got to make way, want to make some space that we'll obviously then share. So I think there are some important messages coming out, that we shouldn't be too discouraged, and that we as women have a lot to contribute to a new world future that might be much more fitting place for all of us, whatever our gender. And I think that that's something to carry with pride rather than apology, that we carry that through. So I don't know, Gulsun, if you want to sort of make your final thank you, but I'd certainly, on my behalf, like to say thank you for all of you. Virtually everybody got a chance to speak, with a few notable exceptions. So thank you all for attending and being for all your contributions. So that's my personal thank you. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Eileen, for your wonderful contributions. I would like to thank you and to thank Hulya for her very comprehensive presentation. And this webinar gave us created an opportunity to meet with so many colleagues here. So this was wonderful, and I hope that you will follow our next webinars, and we will create a kind of, community to discuss our problems further, because in one session we cannot create solutions to our problems, but this kind of platforms, if they, continue to meet, and there is a hope to create real impact on the development of gender equality at least in higher education and research area, if we are not able to extend it to the whole society. But we have a, higher education and research area in our hand, let's say so. There are lots of rectors and deans around, women. So I'm always optimistic, and we have to work towards achieving our goals. Doesn't matter how long it takes. So thank you so much. Thank you for being with us. So good night.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, do you have anything to tell us? Sorry, you are the one of the main persons in this meeting. I'm so sorry. Is Hulya around?
Hulya?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
I just would like to thank to everyone, just you. So thanks and good night. Thank you.
You did a very good job and you worked very hard. Thank you so much, Hulya. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
And just
Bye.
a practical note,
Bye-bye.
somebody asked about circulation of the PowerPoint, so that's
Yeah, thank you.
they'll be available to you.
Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye.
See you in January webinar.
Bye.
Oh.